I could feel it before he even stepped inside. Something in the air had shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the quiet before a curtain rises on a play you didn't know you were part of. I'd been telling myself for months that my life was steady, predictable, even safe. Work, home, the same circle of friends, the same routines. But the truth was, I'd been waiting, without admitting it, for something, or someone, to disturb the stillness. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, medical bag in hand, that familiar half-smile tugging at his lips, I knew this was it. He had been my doctor for years, though that word, doctor, never quite captured the way I saw him. He wasn't just the man who checked my blood pressure or prescribed the occasional antibiotic. He was woven into the fabric of my days in quieter ways. The sound of his laugh at a neighborhood barbecue, the way he always remembered details I had forgotten I even told him. What book I had been reading last, that I preferred ginger tea over coffee when I wasn't feeling well. He carried all those little fragments of me as if they mattered. As if I mattered, and maybe that was why my chest tightened now, watching him set his bag down on the entryway table. "You really should have called sooner," he said, his voice teasing but soft at the edges. "I would have come yesterday if I'd known you were feeling this bad." I shrugged, trying to make light of it. "I didn't want to bother you. Besides, you probably had more important patients to see." His eyes flicked to mine, steady, unamused. "You're important." That single word lodged itself somewhere deep inside me, sparking a warmth I tried to smother with a laugh. I turned away, gesturing toward the living room. The space was modest. Books stacked too high on the coffee table, a blanket thrown haphazardly across the couch, the faint scent of eucalyptus from the diffuser humming quietly in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Still, I suddenly saw it through his eyes, and the thought made me self-conscious in a way I couldn't quite explain. As he set out his tools, I watched him with the kind of attention I usually reserved for novels, studying the curve of his shoulders beneath his shirt, the concentration etched in the furrow of his brow. It was ridiculous, really, how something as ordinary as him pulling on gloves could make my pulse stutter. "You've been pushing yourself again, haven't you?" he asked, his tone half accusation, half affection. I gave him a sheepish smile. "Guilty. You know me." "Yes," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I do." Those words lingered longer than they should have, echoing in the small room. I looked away quickly, pretending to adjust the blanket on my lap, but my mind was buzzing. He couldn't possibly mean it the way it sounded. He was a doctor, a friend, someone who cared in a professional, maybe even protective way. And yet, the truth was, I had noticed the way his hand sometimes brushed mine a second longer than necessary when passing me a cup of tea. The way his gaze occasionally softened in moments of silence, as though he wanted to say something but never did. I had trained myself to ignore these things, to tuck them neatly into the drawer of wishful thinking. But now, sitting here with him close enough that I could catch the faint trace of cedarwood from his cologne, it felt impossible to ignore. As he leaned in to check my temperature, our eyes met, briefly, but long enough that the air seemed to shift again. Something was coming. I didn't know what or when, but I could feel it, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the change. I've known him long enough to understand the rhythm of his presence. He was never one for grand entrances or dramatic flair. He slipped into people's lives quietly, in ways you didn't realize mattered until much later. For me, it started with routine checkups, short conversations that somehow stretched into longer ones, and an ease that felt rare. We weren't just doctor and patient anymore. That line blurred years ago. Somewhere between the time he helped me through a stubborn flu and the summer he invited me to a community bonfire, we became friends. The kind of friends who could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours about nothing and everything. I still remember one late afternoon, a year back, when we'd both ended up at the cafe near the library. He had his medical journals. I had a stack of secondhand novels, and we spent half an hour pretending to be absorbed in our reading before one of us cracked and started talking. He teased me for my obsession with dog-eared paperbacks, claiming I'd single-handedly keep secondhand shops in business. I teased him for his neat, precise notes in the margins of his journals. We laughed, and something about that laughter stuck with me. It felt like it belonged, like we belonged. Now, in the dim light of my living room, that memory came back as he adjusted his stethoscope. "Deep breath," he instructed. Pressing the cold metal against my chest, I obeyed, though my lungs felt tight for reasons that had little to do with illness. His face was close, his focus intent, and I was suddenly hyper-aware of everything. His steady breathing, the warmth radiating off him, the faint scar on his jaw I'd never noticed before. He pulled back after a moment, scribbling something in his notepad. "You're overworked, underrested, and probably skipping meals again," he said, giving me that look, the one that managed to be both stern and caring. I smirked. "What are you, my doctor or my babysitter?" He raised an eyebrow. "Both, apparently." The banter was familiar, easy, but underneath it there was always that current of something unspoken. I wondered if he felt it too, or if it was just me reading too much into the small things. He began packing up his tools, moving with practiced efficiency. But he lingered longer than necessary. His hand brushed mine when he reached for the notebook on the table, and I felt that spark again, sharp and insistent. "Do you remember?" I asked suddenly, desperate to fill the silence. "That time at the cafe, when you tried to convince me medical journals were more exciting than novels?" He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I wasn't trying to convince you. I was just trying to keep you from mocking my handwriting. Which, for the record, looks like a crossword puzzle exploded." His eyes crinkled at the corners, says the man who refuses to use bookmarks like a civilized human being. We laughed together, and for a moment it felt like slipping back into that afternoon sunlight, the air between us lighter, easier. But then his gaze lingered, the laughter fading into something softer. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, shaking his head slightly. I wanted to ask. I wanted to press, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned back on the couch, pretending to adjust the blanket, while inside my chest a storm of questions built. How much of what I was feeling was real? How much of it was simply my own longing, coloring every glance, every word? He cleared his throat, pulling me back to the present. "You should take a few days off work, rest, eat properly. Let your body recover." "Yes, doctor," I said with mock obedience. But my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. Because what I really wanted was something I couldn't say. Not yet. The night stretched on quietly after that. He stayed a little longer than he needed to, making sure I had water within reach, that the blanket covered me properly, even fussing over the angle of the lamp so the light wasn't too harsh. It was the kind of care that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. And as he finally rose to leave, his hand resting on the back of the couch for a fleeting second, I found myself wishing, aching, that he wouldn't, that he would stay, that he would see me not just as a patient, not just as a friend, but as something more. But of course, I didn't say that. Not yet. It started with something as ordinary as dizziness. I had been half ignoring the way my body protested every time I stood too quickly, chalking it up to fatigue, poor sleep, or the fact that I had stubbornly skipped dinner again. But when it happened in front of him, when my knees buckled just as he was reaching for his coat, the room shifted from casual to charged in an instant. "Hey, careful." His voice was sharp, almost panicked, as he caught me by the arm. I blinked, embarrassed, leaning into his steadying hold. "I'm fine," I muttered, though the spinning in my head betrayed me. "You're not fine," he countered, his tone firm. Before I could argue, he guided me back toward the couch, his hand warm and insistent at my back. "Sit, now." There was no point resisting. My body wasn't giving me much choice anyway. I sank down onto the cushions, and he crouched in front of me, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "You scared me," he admitted, softer this time. The words settled between us, heavier than they should have been. I wanted to tell him I hadn't meant to scare him, that it wasn't serious, but something in his face stopped me. His worry wasn't clinical. It wasn't detached. It was personal. He stayed close, closer than usual, one hand still resting lightly on my knee as if making sure I wouldn't topple over again. The weight of that touch was disproportionate to its simplicity, sending heat curling low in my chest. I tried to laugh it off. "Guess you were right about me pushing too hard." His expression didn't shift. "You think this is funny?" "No, I just—" My words faltered under his gaze. His eyes were dark, steady, full of something I couldn't quite name. Concern, yes. Frustration, maybe. But there was more. Something I had only dared imagine before. He exhaled slowly, as though reining himself in. "You're always taking care of everyone else, always pretending you don't need help. But you do. And you're allowed to." The silence stretched, thick and weighted. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. He didn't move his hand, and I didn't ask him to. Instead, I found myself whispering, "I don't like feeling weak in front of you." His brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. "Weak? You think that's what I see when I look at you?" I couldn't answer. The words lodged in my throat, tangled with all the things I hadn't said. He sighed, rising just enough to sit beside me instead of kneeling. The shift brought him closer still, our shoulders brushing. The contact was casual, almost accidental, but it sent a shiver racing down my spine. You drive me crazy sometimes, he admitted, voice low. Always pretending you're fine. Always holding back. I swallowed hard. And what about you? He turned to me then, his face only inches from mine. What about me? I hadn't meant to say it. The question slipped out before I could stop it, before I could decide how much I was ready to risk. But it was too late now. The air between us was charged, crackling with everything unsaid. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. His gaze dropped briefly to my lips before snapping back to my eyes and my breath caught. He leaned back a fraction, as if realizing what he'd almost done, running a hand through his hair with a shaky laugh. This is not professional of me. That word again. Professional. A reminder of the barrier we both pretended still existed. I could have let it end there. I could have changed the subject, diffused the tension, gone back to safe territory. But something in me rebelled against it. Maybe it was the dizziness still clouding my head. Or maybe it was the ache of years spent hiding what I felt. I don't care about professional, I said quietly, surprising even myself. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide, as though he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. And for the first time, I didn't look away. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, alive, buzzing with possibility and fear in equal measure. His hand inched closer on the couch cushion, not quite touching mine, but close enough that the warmth radiated between us. I thought about how easy it would be, in this moment, to bridge that gap, to lace my fingers through his and let the truth spill out. But the fear of ruining everything, the friendship, the trust, the years we'd built, held me frozen. He seemed equally torn, his body angled toward me, his lips parting as though words were on the tip of his tongue, only to vanish again. The night pressed in around us, the quiet of my living room amplifying every small sound, the hum of the diffuser, the faint creak of the couch as we shifted infinitesimally closer. I knew then, with a clarity that scared me, that something had to give. We couldn't keep circling this, pretending it wasn't there, and when it broke, because it would break, it would change everything. The silence after my words, "I don't care about professional," was deafening. I could hear my own pulse thrumming in my ears, feel the faint tremor in my hands as they rested uselessly on my lap. I had said too much and not nearly enough, and now the space between us felt dangerous, electric. He didn't move right away. He just looked at me, his jaw tight, eyes flickering with emotions I couldn't untangle. Then finally he spoke, his voice lower than usual, almost as if he were afraid someone might overhear. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes. Because if you do," he trailed off, exhaling sharply as he leaned back, running a hand over his face. "You can't just drop something like that." I wanted to shrink into myself, to laugh it off, to retreat to the safety of banter and half-truths. But the dam had already cracked, and everything I'd been holding back for years was threatening to spill. "I'm tired of pretending," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to steady it. "Tired of acting like I don't notice the way you stay longer than you need to, or the way your hand lingers, or how you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not paying attention." His head snapped toward me, eyes wide, as though I had just exposed a secret he thought he'd buried well. I forced myself to hold his gaze. "You care about me, not just as a doctor, not just as a friend, and my voice cracked. I closed my eyes for a second, gathering what little courage I had left. "I care about you too, more than I should, more than I've let myself admit." The words hung between us, raw and trembling, vulnerable in a way that left me exposed. My chest felt like it might cave in under the weight of it. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just stared at me, his lips parted as though he wanted to respond but couldn't find the words. The silence stretched, unbearable. My stomach twisted. "Say something," I whispered. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You think this has been easy for me?" I blinked, stunned. He leaned forward then, elbows braced on his knees, his hands clasped together as if to keep them from shaking. "Do you think I haven't noticed? Every time you smile at me, every time I have to remind myself not to touch you more than I should, every time I leave your house and wonder what it would feel like to stay." My breath caught. "You're not the only one who's been pretending," he continued, his voice low and uneven. "I've been doing it too, for years." The words hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. My body went still, my thoughts scattering like leaves in the wind. He had felt it too. All this time he had felt it too. Then why? My voice faltered, too full of questions. "Why didn't you say anything?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "Because I'm your doctor. Because there are lines we're not supposed to cross. Because I told myself it would ruin everything if I said it out loud." "And now?" I asked, barely more than a whisper. His eyes met mine, unguarded at last. Now I don't know if I can keep lying to myself. The room seemed to tilt around us, the weight of his words anchoring me in place. I wanted to move, to reach for him, but my body felt frozen by the enormity of the moment. Tentatively, carefully, I let my hand drift toward his on the couch cushion. My fingers brushed his, just barely, and even that small contact sent a shiver through me. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned his hand palm up, letting my fingers slide into his, holding me with a quiet desperation. I looked down at our joined hands, my heart aching at how natural it felt. "You've been here all this time," I murmured, "and I've been too scared to believe it." His grip tightened. I was scared too. We sat like that for what felt like forever, neither of us moving, both afraid to shatter the fragile truth we'd finally uncovered. Then slowly, he reached up with his free hand and cupped my jaw, his touch hesitant but unbearably tender. "Tell me if I'm wrong," he said softly, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned into his touch, my breath catching as my forehead rested against his. The world narrowed to the warmth of his skin, the closeness of his breath, the trembling certainty that this was what I had wanted for so long. "Don't stop," I whispered. And then his lips were on mine, tentative at first, cautious, as though we were both afraid the moment might break. But when I leaned forward, answering with all the longing I'd buried for years, the kiss deepened, losing its hesitation, becoming something urgent and real. My hands clutched at his shirt, pulling him closer while his arms slid around me, holding me as though he'd been waiting his whole life to. The kiss wasn't perfect. We were both shaking, our breaths uneven. But it was honest. It was ours. When we finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, both of us breathing hard, I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. "I've wanted this," I admitted, my voice cracking. "For so long." "Me too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Longer than I should have." We stayed tangled together, the silence no longer heavy but full, of relief, of possibility, of something we had both been too afraid to hope for. And in that moment, with his arms around me and his heartbeat steady against my chest, I knew with absolute certainty nothing would ever be the same again. For a long while, neither of us moved. We sat there, wrapped in the kind of silence that didn't demand to be broken, his arms around me, my head tucked into the curve of his shoulder. My chest was still heaving from the kiss, but the wild thundering of my heart had softened into something steadier, something I wanted to stay inside forever. When I finally pulled back, it wasn't because I wanted to, it was because I needed to see him, to make sure this wasn't some fever dream my mind had conjured in the haze of exhaustion. His face was so close, his eyes raw and unguarded, his lips still parted as though waiting for another kiss. "You're really here?" I murmured, brushing my thumb across the back of his hand as though testing the reality of it. His mouth quirked, the beginnings of a smile tugging at the corner. "I've been here all along. Took you long enough to notice?" I laughed, soft, shaky, but real. It felt strange and wonderful, how quickly the heaviness of the confession had melted into something lighter. We were still trembling with the weight of what we'd admitted. But now there was joy threaded through the fear. "You make it sound like I've been oblivious." "You have been," he teased, his tone warm. "Do you know how many times I almost gave myself away? How many excuses I made just to see you?" My brows rose, amused and curious. "Oh, like what?" "Like insisting you needed follow-ups when you didn't. Or pretending to drop by the cafe at random when I knew exactly which afternoons you'd be there." I blinked at him, stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. "You mean all those coincidences weren't coincidences?" His grin widened, a little sheepish. "Not even close." The admission sent a glow through me, equal parts relief and thrill. All those years I'd been second-guessing, doubting, convincing myself I was imagining things. He had been fighting the same battle. We hadn't just stumbled into this. We'd been orbiting each other for a long time. I shifted closer, curling my legs beneath me so I could face him fully. My hand found his again, intertwining our fingers with a familiarity that felt brand new and ancient at the same time. "So what now?" I asked quietly, the laughter fading into something more serious. His smile softened. "Now we figure it out. Together." The word together hit me like a steadying anchor. For so long, everything between us had been laced with hesitation, with unspoken rules and imagined barriers. Now, for the first time, it felt simple. Not easy. We both knew there would be challenges, but simple in the way truth often is. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his shoulder, breathing him in, the faint cedar wood of his cologne, the warmth of his skin, the quiet strength in the way he held me. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Me too," he said softly, pressing a kiss into my hair. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." The words undid me a little, and I clutched him tighter, afraid to let go. When we finally pulled apart again, the mood shifted, playful energy bubbling up to fill the cracks left by fear. He nudged my shoulder gently. "You know, I should probably add terrible patient to your medical record." I snorted. "And what about doctor with questionable boundaries?" His laugh was startled but full, the sound warming me all the way through. "Touché." We sat like that for hours, talking in circles about everything and nothing. The books stacked on my coffee table, the ridiculousness of my cooking attempts, the way he'd once gotten lost trying to find my street and pretended he hadn't. Each memory, each teasing remark felt different now, threaded with intimacy, with the knowledge that we no longer had to pretend. At some point, my head found its way to his lap, his fingers brushing absently through my hair as we talked. The gesture was casual, unthinking, but it sent shivers down my spine. Every touch felt amplified now, every glance loaded with new meaning. "Don't get used to this," he teased, though his hand didn't stop. "Too late," I replied, eyes closed, smiling against the cushion. The night stretched on until exhaustion finally claimed me. But even as my eyes drifted shut, I knew I wasn't falling asleep into the same world I'd woken up in. Something had shifted, permanently, irreversibly, and for once that didn't scare me at all. I woke to the quiet hum of morning, sunlight slipping through the blinds and pale ribbons across the living room. For a second I didn't move. I lay still, caught between the hazy edges of sleep and waking, listening to the rhythm of his breathing beside me, and then it hit me. This wasn't a dream. The weight of his arm draped across me, the warmth of his body pressed against mine. These weren't figments of a restless imagination. They were real. We were real. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of him. His hair was tousled, his jaw rough with the beginnings of stubble. His mouth softened in sleep. I had seen him countless times before, but never like this, unguarded, here, with me. For a moment, I let myself just look, memorizing him in the morning light. The realization spread through me slowly, steadily. My life had shifted, and there was no going back. When he stirred, his arm tightening instinctively around my waist, I whispered, "Morning." His eyes cracked open, hazy with sleep, but the smile that curved his lips was immediate, unthinking. "Morning." The word was ordinary, but the way he said it, like it belonged to us now, made my chest ache in the best way. We stayed like that for a while, trading soft words and lazy smiles, neither of us in a hurry to break the spell. Eventually, though, he sat up, running a hand through his hair with a groggy laugh. "I should probably go before your neighbors start gossiping." "Let them gossip," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my tone. He looked at me then, really looked, his expression softening. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." I shifted upright, tugging the blanket around my shoulders. "I'm done hiding. From them, from myself, from you." For a second he just watched me, something unspoken flickering in his eyes. Then he reached out, taking my hand in his, pressing his lips to the back of it with a tenderness that nearly undid me. "Then I'm done too," he whispered. The promise in his voice was quiet, but it was steady. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it didn't need to be. It was real. And that was enough. Later, as he helped me tidy up the clutter from the night before, the ease between us settled into something natural. He teased me about my chaotic book stacks. I teased him about the way he folded the blanket like he was preparing a surgical gown. It was ordinary, almost laughably so, and yet everything felt different. At the door he paused, his hand lingering on the knob before turning back to me. "We're not going to have all the answers right away. It won't be simple." "I don't want simple," I said, stepping closer, my hand brushing his. "I just want you." His eyes softened, his lips parting as though to say something. But instead he leaned down and kissed me again, slow this time, deliberate, sealing the moment like a vow. When we finally pulled apart, I smiled, my forehead still resting against his. "So what happens next?" He chuckled, his breath warm against my skin. "Next you rest, and then—" His thumb traced the edge of my jaw. "Then we figure out how to make this work. Together." That word again. Together. It rang in my chest like a promise, grounding me more than anything else could. As I watched him walk away, sunlight catching on his shoulders, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The doubts, the hesitation, the fear of change. They were still there, yes, but smaller now, quieter. What mattered was that we had finally stepped past the barrier of silence. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like an open door. I closed it gently behind him, my hand lingering on the knob, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My heart was still racing, not with fear this time, but with hope, because this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything.